Good morning, Joshua. How are you doing?
Jens, we're back in action. Good to be back with you for another session of the Reverse Mental Lab Friday live.
Yes, looking forward too. It's awesome because it's Friday. And it was a busy week for both of us,
Yeah,
as
it's
usual.
it's 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 interesting. I popped off an email to someone this morning, and I said, "Welcome to December and one of the last Fridays of 2021." And it's
It's
quite
nuts.
crazy to think about how quickly the year has gone, everything that's happened. But yeah, it sort of tees up our topic well today.
Yeah. So what we agreed from a topic today is look back to look forward. And as usual, or most of the time, you come up with the topics. What have been your first thought while putting that together?
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic, Jens, and I think the first thing, or one of the first things rather, that came to mind when I thought about it was this concept of what does it mean to move forward? Where do we get the inspiration from? What are some of the inputs that we use to move forward? And do we necessarily spend enough time looking back to move forward?
Hmm.
And what got me thinking about this was I've been spending a lot of time thinking about community, thinking about networks, thinking about impact, and this bigger piece of the puzzle that we call the world we live in. And I've really been thinking about what are the lessons from history that we should be referencing.
Hmm.
And by history, I mean past experiences, shared experiences, different generations, deep history. And we're talking great time spans here. But at a simple standpoint, it's saying we've actually experienced a lot of things before as humanity. What can we learn from those things to allow us to make better decisions going forward so that we can create a better world, one that's more equitable, more shared, more diverse, etc., into the future that we're hoping to build to. And it's something that I sort of generally do at this time of year in terms of looking to wind down the calendar year, that is.
Yeah.
But that's sort of where my mind started with this topic that we've got lined up for today.
Yeah, that's cool because I also see different dimension. There's the micro version, which is like, yeah, what happened the last months, the last couple of months, the last year, and looking back at that, what did I learn to move forward or to look ahead? And that then the same on a macro level. It's like, what does it mean from a decade perspective, maybe life perspective, and then for me different flavors. One is on a personal level and from an organizational level. So if you're a leader in an organization, what how would you do that? How do you look into that? And on an individual level, like you and I and everyone else watching this, what does it mean for yourself? What did you learn, or what could you learn by looking back and
Mm.
using that to go ahead? So that's at least where I started thinking.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the point that you raised there about individual versus collective as well is also an important point to raise. And I think that, when we start thinking about this concept of moving forward and this concept of building, is sometimes we think that we need to always build new things. And what I mean by that is that we're always wanting to move things forward. And by advancing or moving things forward, we need to reinvent the way that we did things before.
Yeah.
And by reinvention, it may just by, changing one switch. And inside of doing that, you're moving something dramatic or moving something forward in such a dramatic way, rather than just thinking that you need to rebuild this entire concept. And that's sort of something that I think that we could all take a lesson from, especially in terms of thinking across generations. And I think the way that you frame that, Jens, between individual and the collective is really powerful, because it asks us to think about what does it mean as an individual to look back, and how might that inform the way that we move forward as a collective. So if I
Yeah.
maybe take this from an abstract sense and I bring it down into something practical, and I say, if we engage in a practice like this inside of a team, so I'll take myself as an example. And a couple of years ago, I was part of a startup, and inside of that startup team, we sort of did retrospectives. So we sort of looked back on what we'd accomplished, what we may have could have done better, what we did right, etc. And that informed the next steps and how we moved forward as a collective. And I think in terms of that practice, in terms of making the time to do an evaluation like this, is something that we can sometimes not do because there's always new things to do when we're moving forward. And if we actually don't take the time and spend time looking back, we won't move forward in the best possible way, more efficiently, and in the right way as well.
Yeah. And I agree. It's so important. And I mean, I need to touch my own nose. I don't know if that works in English, but but it's I not often, but I also sometimes don't take the time, or not often enough take the time and reflect back. And it's like, yeah, okay. So what did happen and how did it happen? How do I use that? I do that frequently, but not often enough. But I think
Mm.
and there might be as well reasons for that. Yesterday, for example, we have been in a call where we looked into how do you establish trust? How do you work with people you don't know at all? And a lot of things, or a lot of interactions on a human level, are based on past, are based on, so what did you do over the last years, months, whatever. So people are judging other people based on what they have done, what they have achieved, what is their status. And that's all past perspective. But of course, it informs what you can do in the future. And that's just a small reflection which just jumped into my head, where I was thinking, yes, there are different levels as well from an individual perspective. Okay, what did I do the last year to achieve my dreams and desires and my mission, and what did I not do, and why did I not do that? To reflect on a single person, but I think the same from an organizational perspective. What did we set out to do from an impact, and what did we truly do, and what didn't allow us to go there, what didn't allow us to achieve that future state scenario? And then really
Mm.
analyzing that, I have worked with and in a lot of corporations over the last 25 years now, where you only look ahead. Most of the time you look ahead, you look into, hey, okay, now we need to what was a nice way of saying, a not nice way but fun way of saying it, like growth on growth. We need to double what we have done last year from a percentage wise. We need to double, we need to triple, we need to 10x. That's always future focus, and I think there's a value in that. But what is often not happening, what did you learn from the past? What did you learn that things didn't work out? Or even when you have achieved all your dreams, all your goals, what did you learn from that? What can you contribute to other things? And I would like to bring that back to our concept, which is the reverse mentorship, where we say learning with each other, learning from a generational perspective. How do you do that in a way that you learn? So you're a young person, you're going into the workforce. How do you learn from the experience of the people who are in your organization? Or on a personal
Mm.
level, how do you learn from experienced people around you? But in the same way, the other way around, if we say looking back, if an experienced leader, an experienced person in an organization looks backwards, saying, okay, I have, if we take myself, 25 years of work experience in corporations. What did I learn that I can give to a young person which is starting right now? What are the things I wished I would have known already when I started my career, with maybe having an interaction with someone who is 20 years ahead of me, saying, hey, these are the things, these are the mistakes I did, just to let you know. Maybe you need to do the same ones, but this is what I learned. Maybe there are a couple of learnings for you which you can accelerate if you don't do the same mistakes.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a lot there, Jens, and I'm just going to bring it back to the concept that you put down earlier around the difference between micro and macro. And in terms of that example that you gave about reflecting on the call we were both on yesterday, is a showcase in terms of the micro environment and maybe the more immediate environment that we should be looking back on. And if we take a week, for example, and inside of this digital world and inside of this highly strung digital age that we're in at the moment, we go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and it comes to the end of the week, and everyone, what you want to do, you want to put your feet up on a Friday night or put your feet up on a Saturday. And yes, we may reflect subconsciously, but how could we actually reflect intentionally So look back on the week and say, hey, what did I miss? What could I have done differently? Because if you just do that little tweak, there's often a completely different stand of viewpoints that you can bring into the table, which then can help you move forward and create better decision-making structures going forward. And the second is around macro. So what does it mean to reflect at the end of the year? And what does it mean to create these bigger reflection environments and times where you look back across teams and things like that to allow people to grow with inside of your team? And if you take the example that you just used around, your 25-year experience and my relatively young experience, I think if we can find a way to communicate that experience and those learnings, it then becomes extremely powerful to help the younger generation inside of the workforce and inside of the world to actually think through those things. And I think one of the biggest things that we're facing at the moment is around almost information overload. And are we looking at the right things? And I think if these learnings can be shared in a way that's digestible, that's relational, and what I mean by relational is that means that younger generations can actually understand the learnings from the experienced thinkers, I think then you can look to unlock something incredibly powerful that will allow us to move forward in quite a drastic way.
Yeah. One important thing to do that is seeing it as an investment rather than seeing it as a cost. From cost, I mean, it's like, hey, I now need to spend time on something I wouldn't normally not do. Um, and I think that's it, it goes always back into the mindset, specifically if we move to the work world. Um, why should an executive leader or an experienced leader in an organization spend time on having a conversation with the young person in the organization and sharing their knowledge and sharing, hey, this is what I learned this year, this is what I learned the last 20 years. I would love to share that with you. And I
Mm.
at least have never seen it happening in a corporate setting, but imagine every organization would spend a little bit of time, and that means investment. I think this investment, if we just look into return on invest, will be paid back in the next year easily,
Mm.
because the young person, the young leader will say, oh, I've never seen it from that perspective. And by having this interaction, maybe the young person will share as well, this is what I learned this year, to the experienced person. The experienced person will say, oh, I've never seen it from that way. And then taking actions, or most properly taking results or things forward after that conversation, will change the roadmap of the organization. And even if it's just one department, um, I just truly believe it's huge. So for me, it's really, how can we use that as an investment rather than saying, hey, we burden us to do this right now. And yeah, it comes from the management, or someone has had this idea, let's engage between generations, and now it's an official program, which is a mentorship program, or however it's called in different organizations, and we are forced to do that. And
Mm.
it's just a tiny mindset shift where you say, hey, this is one of the biggest opportunities for us as a business to learn from each other. And you
Yeah.
can widen that with the customers, you can widen that with partners, competitors. That's the next level, but I think starting internally is the first step.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thought that you mentioned there, Jens, around making space to share those learnings and how we go about doing that. And James Clear, and many of you that are listening in and on the call may have heard of his book Atomic Habits. And one of the quotes inside of that book is he says, "If you think you can learn a lot from reading books, try writing one."
Hmm.
And if you think about what that means in terms of sharing these learnings, so you've got an experienced thinker who may share these learnings, but what does it mean from a young thinker's perspective inside of this environment? And I think it's one thing for a young thinker to absorb these learnings, but it's another thing for a young thinker to actually process and utilize these learnings in terms of their own development.
Hmm.
And I'd encourage young thinkers that are listening, and more broadly, is that sometimes I think we get caught up in this need for speed. And what I mean by that is that we don't make enough time to look back. We don't actually acknowledge, hey, I've been working for the last 5 years. What are some of the experiences that I've had? And I actually had this happen to me in the last 3 months, where I was working through some of this networking world that I was in, and I was actually not considering some of the experiences that I've had in the past,
Hmm.
that if I'd framed them in that specific way, it would have portrayed me in a much more qualified and much more experienced light than it actually did. And I didn't take the time to actually think, hey, I've built out these things 5 years ago. But because I was so focused on just going forward, I didn't actually take a step back, look back at what I'd done, and actually reference some of the learnings that I'd had from those experiences.
Yeah. And then maybe one thing is because you're a humble person, you don't want to put yourself into the forefront. That's why you don't do it. But I agree, it's a key part, and specifically in today's society, if we take social media, there are a lot of people who are um, shooting it from the rooftops, and you don't know if they really have done anything. And it's hard to judge. Not saying that everyone who is doing a lot of things on social media, that because that would include me, um is is just kind of doing the shout out and not having the background. For me, it's more about the background just gives you a little bit more credibility if you know about the person. But in
Mm.
the end, it's really about the exchange you can start with having different conversation. Because for me, and I got the feedback in one of the calls we have been in together, I'm a different person than I was when I was working in the corporate world. That's why I try to not put that too much on the table, that hey, I was the corporate dude and I was having this position. And that I know and personally understand that it's limiting my opportunities to work with other companies because I'm not using it too much.
Mm.
But that's more a personal decision where I say, looking back, I was a different person. I like myself more right now, and I want to do other things. And to be able to do that, I take myself back. And that's what I have learned by looking backwards. It's like, yeah, I could have maybe more money. I could maybe have more companies who are willing to work with me. But looking forward, are this the companies they choose me because I was having this title that I will have fun to work with? So it's
Mm.
really it fits to the topic, whereas looking backwards and saying taking conscious decisions to say going forward, I take a downside maybe, but long term it will be positive.
Yeah, and I think that's almost a fascinating transition in terms of some of the thoughts that I was having while you were talking, Jens, was around this transition in terms of time frames and our relationship with time and space. And what I mean by that is, yesterday I was listening into a fascinating Twitter space. And for those who aren't familiar with Twitter and Twitter spaces, it's essentially an audio room that is spun up inside of Twitter, and it allows different people to join that audio room. So think of it like talk radio, but now you can participate in talk radio and you can even get called up onto the stage. But essentially, this space was around Adidas Originals announcing that they were going into the metaverse. And this concept, and why I'm bringing it up, is because the moderator and the facilitator of that space asked the panelists and the people on the stage what these certain words meant to them.
Hmm.
And if you think about that, there are reference points that you're linking to when you think about defining those words. And that is almost, in its sense, is you're looking back on your experiences to define those words that you are sharing. And I think it's quite fascinating when you think about this new space in terms of moving forward, and what are we going to take with us as we move forward? What do we choose to take with us from our past, from our previous experiences, whether it be the last week, month, year, 10 years, into this new realm or this new paradigm that we're building out? And I think that the more that we can realize and intentionally be clear around what we are taking with and what we are leaving behind, the better it will be for our own thinking, but also for our teams that we're working with, for our organizations that we're building out, and at the end of the day, for ourselves. Because, Jens, I think you highlighted a super important point there around almost when people are more comfortable with themselves and they are clear around where they want to go and how they want to do that, they can really do some really cool stuff.
Hmm.
And they can build some phenomenal teams because, experienced thinkers have built some really cool and innovative things. And now they've done that, they've achieved that. Now they're backing their own ability to saying, hey, what am I going to take with me into this next phase? And in doing that, they are going to really create some innovative things in terms of what that looks like over a longer term period. And then that comes back right back to the start where you mentioned trust. And how do we trust not only in ourselves in terms of looking back and taking those things into this moving forward state, but also around trust in terms of the people that we're working with. And if we can, as a collective, sit down and look back and reflect on things and be open and honest, not only with ourselves, but with the broader team, that sort of creates a whole different level of trust, which means that you are far more united and far more open to move forward in a faster and more agile way.
Yeah. Doubling down on the time part, because I'm extremely bad in that. And using the word patience, having that where you look forward and where you take a bit longer term perspective is, in today's busy world where it's so fast paced in a lot of things, it's very, very, very hard to be patient because you want to have the instant gratification. Hey, I'm doing this today, so I want to have the result tomorrow. And I think that's another generational learning opportunity for a lot of young leaders. Things take time. I was always the person who was saying, "No, I'm ready. I can do this today." I and that's most probably why I've had been able to do a lot of things more than other people have done in their age. So it's, yes, it's a driver, but it's also, from a patient's perspective, investing, and that goes back to the other part. Investing into something that will pay back in 2 years is very hard today, in today's time. We're taught through social media and through um, other topics where it's instant gratification. If we take Amazon, into Amazon right now, I know it's going to be here. Most of the things are going to be here in the next 3 days if I order something. So this instant gratification is so fast in everything. So we always think like, yeah, I'm doing this right now. I'm talking to an experienced thinker and I will be promoted next week, or the other way around, where a young thinker is talking with an experienced thinker, not the other way around. And is expecting, hey, this young thinker will do something for me tomorrow. But it's about, hey, if we think about long-term perspective and patience and say, we're investing into something today that allows us to do something completely different tomorrow. It's so hard, and I'm maybe the worst person talking about that because I'm super impatient. I'm super bad in a lot of things when it comes to that. And that's maybe as well one of the learnings I can give to young thinkers is like, hey, you have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years in front of you. Don't rush it. Take a year off and go somewhere, travel around the world, which a lot of other people would say, are you nuts to say that to young people? They should work. But I truly believe every young person under the age, or let's say under the age of 25, should have traveled the world, the best case, because you're a completely different person if you're able to do that. And I know not everyone is able to do that, but it's truly amazing. And it slows you down in your education, in your studies, and your professional development, but it's an investment that come back 20 times afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it's fascinating, and that sort of ties into also, from a personal standpoint, thinking about the last 2 years and what lessons that we've learned from COVID and the lessons that we're still learning from COVID. And it's this relationship with space. And if we think about what that means in terms of how that has changed, 2 years ago we would have had a vastly different definition of what we think space is. And now, you're very grateful for some space in terms of your immediate surroundings, whether that be you're walking down the street or the ability to get in back into an airplane or to go on holiday again and things like that. And if we think about that from a personal standpoint and we tie that into Jens, what I'll say is around, you reference the ability to learn from experiences. And that's almost a different type of learning that we can gain from looking back and from learning in that way versus a formal or fixed learning environment in terms of going through university or going through fixed courses or diplomas or whatever we want to call that way of education. And I think that talks to the changing models that are happening now. And I
Mm.
think a lot of people will see models that may have existed before when they look back. And the reason maybe those models didn't succeed is because the environment that they were created in wasn't ready for that. And that sort of ties to your concept, the thing that you mentioned on patience. And a couple of weeks back, I was having a conversation with someone who came up with an idea in 2008, and the technology wasn't ready for that idea in 2008. But now, with everything that's happening, the space is ready for it.
Mm.
And now it's, if you can restart those engines, restart that way of thinking, get the team back together to now help this idea come to life. There's a huge amount of, and a lesson in terms of having the ability to remember that, hey, I worked on this space in 2008. These are some of the lessons that I learned. This is why I didn't pursue it. Now, immediately you can plug these learnings in to this environment that's now right for it, and almost move forward from your learnings in the past. And I think in terms of thinking about the way that we learn, the experiences that we have, and almost that lapse of time. And sometimes the lapse of time is what we need to allow ourselves to learn from those experiences as well.
Yeah. It's so hard to it's easy, and I get that, like, we talk about this and we're kind of exploring that space, and there might be young people or experienced people that say, yeah, guys, that sounds all nice, but I have other problems right now. And I get that. I think it's really, and maybe that gets us towards the end of today's live stream, is how do we make it practical? So let's put ourselves again on the spot and look into, okay, we and I truly believe in that, and you too, is that looking back to look forward is a huge opportunity for you. But how are we going to synthesize that to a practical action point? Because I believe if we can not just give the understanding of why it's important to people, as well giving a possibility or to understand what you can do, it will enable everyone who is watching this right now live, or as well later on in the recordings, or listening to it on the podcast, you can take the steps straight away. So Josh, shall I put myself first, or are you ready to put yourself
Yeah,
into the ring?
I'm happy to take a stab at it. So firstly, yeah, Jens, thanks again for the live session. It's been great to connect again and to test our thinking in terms of what it actually means, and pulling the abstract into the practical. So with that in mind, I'm going to start off my answer around saying that there are no right answers when it comes to this question.
Mm.
And the reason I say that is because everyone is an individual, everyone has different scenarios, and everyone has different things that they need to deal with. And life sometimes throws you curveballs. But I'm going to talk about this from a subjective standpoint and some of the experiences that I've had, which has helped me to look back to move forward. So think through the decisions that you take. And at the end of the day, you need to also realize that things aren't necessarily as big as they always seem. And what I mean by that, from a young thinker's perspective, is when you leave university or when you leave your studies, which whatever that may be, you're always thinking about what's next. And you sometimes need to think about what's now in order to discover what's next. And if I think about this from my own perspective, is I was hyper concerned when I left university in terms of what was I going to do now. And it took a mentor, and who's now developed into a close friend of mine, to say to me, appreciate the now. And I think
Mm.
in terms of understanding that can help you to look back and actually say, I've got all of these learnings, I've got these lessons. Let me appreciate the now and appreciate the space that I'm in. The second side of things is allowing yourself the space to develop into your thinking. And what I mean by that is sometimes when we engage with things, we are so focused on the doing that we don't actually reflect on and take the time to think about what we've done. And if we don't do that, and it's happened to me before, so I'm speaking from experience here, is where you actually make more mistakes because you are so focused on the doing. And those are two things that have helped me in terms of thinking through, looking back to move forward, and two experiences that I hope will help you as a young thinker bring some of these abstract concepts into the practical.
Yeah. Love it. It's quite funny. The other day I was, and there are a lot of models that can help you to do that. So I was I'm a huge fan of Evernote, which is just a tool, note taking tool for those who are not familiar with that. And I was searching for something from 4 years back, and funnily enough, I found it because I am trying to sell a bike, and by searching for the receipt of the bike, what I found was my journal from that day, because I was writing in that journal, hey, I'm buying a new bike that's exciting here and there and there. So quite interesting. And linking that to this is the looking back part. So it's super helpful, and there are a lot of people who teach how to do that, is writing down on a daily base. And I have been in that pattern. I need to go back to that. Was writing down what positive things happened today. So I was focusing on the positive the whole time, not on the negative. And even if there has been something negative, turning that into something positive. What did I learn from that negative thing? But I was only writing down the positive, because you change your mindset if you think positive. And connecting that to looking forward, Dennis, one of our common friends and colleagues, um, has told me about a book he was reading, or it's also a movie, which is called The Secret, where he was saying, it's like, yeah, if you believe in things, they're going to happen. And then he told me a story from himself, and then he was saying, yeah, but you are anyhow into that, so it's no problem. And I've never heard about the book, so I was researching the book. What is the book about? And then, um for those who don't know the book, it's all about how do you kind of create a future, visual picture of where you want to be, and that will drive you to that point. And they're giving some stupid examples, like, if you want to drive this car, then you need to think you are sitting in that car, and you need to feel it, and so on. For me, it's not about, hey, there's a monetary aspect and you want to sit in that car. But reflecting back on that, what was quite funny, what I explored over the last days, I have been in the global position in the corporate where I was because of my future picture at that time. And this picture was so strong, built up over, yeah, at that time, 15 years. And that has led me to that position. And then I found out that this picture is not where I want to be when I was there. And there's nothing bad in that. It's just a part of your life, because what I also understood, that we all have different parts of our life, and we do different things in our lives. So it's often not, it's a graduate movement towards one direction, and then you're retiring. That was maybe the case a couple of years back, but today it's more about, hey, you have an interest for a certain amount of time, you love that, you get energy out of that, and maybe after that something happens, or you have something else where you have more interested in, and that changed the future picture. So it's for everyone who wants to go into practical, write down positive things every day. What did you achieve? What did you learn? And then look into what is your future perspective, and visualize yourself inside of the future perspective by taking the learnings on a day-to-day base into that future picture, and you will achieve it. I'm the living proof that it's working. And it's unconscious, of course, but I'm now using that power as well to look into my future, and I've used it in sport. Like, everyone who is deep into sport psychology knows that. Picture yourself running across the finish line if you do a marathon, as an example, and that will help you to endure the pain, or at least better. And it's a super 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 good practical tool, and it's super basic. So everyone, try it out. Happy to give more input to that, but I'm not a specialist. I'm just a practitioner of it.
Yeah, and maybe so Jens, firstly, I love those practical tips that you gave, and I think we can all learn from them. And just to wrap up for this call is, what if we think about looking back as an investment rather than a cost? Because sometimes I think when we think about looking back, as we think of it as slowing down, and maybe we need to slow down. And the other side of things is around saying, let's be intentional around what we want to move forward to. And I think you touched on that super well with the last point in terms of crossing a marathon line and picturing yourself in your running kit crossing that line.
Hmm.
And what may that look like if we are successful in achieving the things that we lay out for ourselves to do. So I've really enjoyed the conversation today, Jens, and hopefully we can now heed some of our own advice and look back on the last year and see what we will take forward into the new year.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Thank you very much, Josh, for today. It was a pleasure.